My name is and I would like to welcome you to the World of Cannabis Law panel at California Western School of Law. CLS was founded through an intersectional lens with the principles of equity, innovation, sustainability, social justice, and creativity at the forefront. Our mission is to educate, advocate, and connect consumers, legal professionals, and the public at large about cannabis law and regulation practices, and to provide opportunities in the cannabis business sector. Our schedule for today is I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then they're going to go ahead and give you 10 minutes introduction to what they do in their particular area of the law. After that, we're going to, Judge Mary and Celeste is going to ask them questions based off their discussion that they've chosen to talk about. And then after that, we're going to do a Q&A from the audience and from Zoom, followed by closing remarks. So I'm going to just start with introductions, and then my board, and then we'll introduce the panel. So, the board, sorry. I'm Dillo. I'm the president and founder of Cannabis Law Student Society here at CWSL. We'll just go by row.
I'm Drew. I'm the 3L ambassador. Love cannabis. And love the upcoming legalization of psychedelics. I think it'll be very interesting for those you don't know.
I'm Jay. I am the social chair, and I am a 3L graduate. And I just want to thank everyone for coming. It's like our first girl big event.
I'm Nick. I'm the junior secretary. My 2L.
And I'm Sarah Kelpie, and I am also a 2L ambassador.
I'm Hannah Zumper. I'm also a 2L ambassador, and I'd like to thank you guys all for coming as well. It was fun being all together.
I'm Tariq. I'm the professional liaison. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the panelists for coming as well.
Not here today, but we could not put this together without them, or like continue on without them. Marissa Mendoza is our vice president. Ben Cochran, our treasurer. Brooke is amazing. She's our secretary. Canas is our social media chair, and today we have with us Shane O'Connell from Salem Seed, along with Israel Ian, sorry for that. Whitney, Hodges, McCracke, and Ken Sobel. And then we're going to be moderating, Judge Mary Celeste is going to be moderating our panel for us. Judge Celeste?
I don't think she's there. Oh, wait.
I'm here. I didn't know you wanted me on camera. Yes, so we're going to begin with Whitney Hughes. You want to introduce her any further, Helene?
No.
All right. She works in the field of cannabis land use and natural resources. Whitney is about 7:08, so at 7:18, I'll hone in and stop you and then ask you a question. So you're on now, Whitney. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Hi, I'm Whitney Hodges. I am a partner at Sheppard Mullin. We are a international law firm, and I head our cannabis industry team, as well as practice in our real estate, land use, and environmental practice group. So originally I started out my legal career practicing land use, which is essentially helping developers get all the necessary entitlements for developing whatever they're looking to do, whether it be residential, mixed use, commercial, industrial, renewable energies, you name it, I've had my hand in it. When cannabis came on the scene, particularly in California, it was for me, incredibly academically interesting because there's been no other time that I can think of where a new land use or the way land was used was being introduced wholly into an already set system. So it was interesting to see how California was going to do it, and I don't know if you guys are aware of this, so I'm sorry if you've already learned this, but in California, local governments have police power under the Constitution, which translates into their ability to zone land how they deem fit based upon their constituents' needs, their resources, the environment, what have you for each jurisdiction. So throwing cannabis and all that entails into schemes that each jurisdiction has already determined for itself was, for me, going to be something very interesting to watch. And that's sort of what was my foray into cannabis law, was how are these local jurisdictions going to decide to implement cannabis use? And particularly here in San Diego County, there were some jurisdictions that said, hey, absolutely not. We're not going to allow cannabis growth, distribution, or retail of any kind. And the California Supreme Court said, huh, that's cute. State law reigns supreme and you have to abide by it. So already San Diego was sort of putting itself out there, maybe a bit as a problem child. So practicing in San Diego, I thought it was going to be very interesting to watch this industry develop. At the firm, we have been doing cannabis, particularly when it was just medicinal cannabis, so the co-ops, what have you, before adult use. The Cole memo came out, the firm was really interested in cannabis law. Jeff Sessions came on the scene and said, hey, we're taking the Cole memo back and we're now going to go after ancillary service providers as well as anyone that's in the cannabis industry. We're going to put federal money towards it. When Jeff Sessions was replaced, the firm said, you know what, now's the time we're really gonna put our cannabis industry team, at the forefront. We're gonna recognize that it's gonna be outward facing as opposed to just bringing in various practices into our group. And so with that, my firm introduced a team that now boasts over 100 attorneys in various different sorts of practices. We've got employment, intellectual property, what have you. You've got, your major law, what you practice, and then how it intersects with cannabis. So for me, my practice of cannabis will always intersect with land use, will always intersect with environmental, will always intersect with real estate. So when I represent cannabis operators or ancillary service providers, it is in the land use lens of things. How can I help you as an operator or ancillary service provider get your necessary approvals, your conditional use permits from the local level to allow you to use the land as you see fit. There's also a lot of environmental concerns when it comes to cannabis, whether it be outdoor grow, indoor grow, or manufacturing. And I think that's something we're seeing really with the maturation of the industry come to the forefront, particularly with water use, soil degradation, hazardous byproducts that come after the plants have been treated and manufactured. So we're really seeing the emergence of sort of environmental compliance issues. And again, not to point out San Diego being a problem child, but there was an operator here that was illegally dumping the byproduct of cannabis plants in some competitors' yards, essentially. And the government wasn't too happy about that. So these are sort of the issues that I deal with on a day-to-day basis when it comes to cannabis operators and ancillary service providers. And I don't think that was 10 minutes, and I can't believe a lawyer didn't take all the time they were allotted to talk.
Well, let me ask you a couple of questions. I know that a lot of water rights are controlled by the federal government, the Land Reclamation Act. You find that you run into some people where marijuana grows and
Hey, you completely cut out.
yes?
Oh, sorry, you had completely cut out.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, you had completely cut out and we couldn't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Have you Whitney encountered any issues with the federal government because they control a lot of the waterways and water for hemp grows and marijuana grows with the, I think it's called the Land Reclamation Act. Have you run into issues with feds on that?
Not necessarily with water usage. Again, yes, the federal government does control a lot of the waterways and the ways water is used because it controls interstate commerce, which is definitely a problem with federal criminalization and keeping cannabis as a Schedule I drug. And that interstate commerce and the Dormant Commerce Clause, I know the idea of that probably bores everyone to death, but that is really gonna become an issue once we start legalizing cannabis nationally. So I won't touch that, but I will say that, you know, again, going back to police powers under the California Constitution, there are specific state laws that once the federal government has allotted water to the states or states have agreed to it, particularly here in the West, how we agree how the Colorado River will be distributed between everyone. Once the water is allotted to a state, then the state takes that water and allots it to different municipalities, again, based on state laws, inter-agreements between local governments. So I really haven't seen a lot of issues with the feds coming down related to water rights, but what we are seeing in the world of water and issues with cannabis is that cannabis takes a lot of water to grow. And California is facing a drought, particularly Southern California. Areas in the sort of the Emerald Triangle aren't facing as much push and pull when it comes to the allotment of water that they need for large-scale commercial grows. But it is definitely something that's on our radar as the drought continues to deepen and companies, businesses, and individuals are being forced to rein back on their water usage.
So, Whitney, you say that you're affiliated with a law firm that has 100 attorneys with various areas of practice. We have a lot of law students who are part of the Cannabis Club and part of the law school who have an interest in entering the field of cannabis law, whether it be what you do or other issues related to cannabis. So what would be your best advice for someone who wants to move in that direction?
I think, and I hate to tell you guys to do more research, but it would be to do your research. So in a firm like Sheppard Mullin, we have, I think, over 1,000 attorneys internationally, over 100 of whom practice in cannabis in some space. We don't have dedicated cannabis attorneys. All of our attorneys have what we call our major, and cannabis is our minor. So if you want to practice cannabis full-time, my advice would be to research the firms that have that as an option. If you are interested in something outside of cannabis as well, like land use, environmental, labor and employment, intellectual property, focusing on that as sort of what you do day in and day out with the cannabis overlay on top of that, that's what firms like Sheppard Mullin and what we're seeing a lot of the AmLaw 100 law firms doing. We don't have dedicated cannabis attorneys. So it's really researching the law firms you're interested in. If you're interested in doing solely cannabis, know that that is going to take you a certain direction in terms of law firm size, likely, at least for right now. And then, you know, I think just being involved, doing what you're doing right now, this is an ever-changing industry. This is an ever-changing market. I mean, we're seeing states fall like dominoes when it comes to legalization and how they're expanding upon what their regimes look like. I think we're gonna have a lot of work to do in states that legalized before the nation did in terms of how they're gonna do their regulatory compliance and what happens when the federal government comes out. Are they gonna allow us to keep going in this patchwork type progression that we've had? So there's a lot of staying up to date on current trends on the laws, I think is really what is going to make you a good cannabis attorney. It's in flux every day. So not to give you guys more work, but that would be my advice. Do your research on the firms and then make sure you're staying current on the ever-changing industry.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ken Sobel, and he is considered a medical cannabis advocate. Ken, you're on for the next 10 minutes.
All right, thank you very much. Can you hear me, everybody here? Hi, Cal Westner. It's good to be back. This is my alma mater. I graduated here in 1980. I was proud to graduate from Cal Western. It served me well throughout my law career. I'm a passionate advocate for everything I'm involved in, and for the past 22 years, that advocacy has been towards cannabis. And I got assigned medical cannabis because I'm probably the only lawyer that's ever tried a case, an evidentiary case, and proven to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that cannabis is safe and effective for multiple medical conditions. And I could prove that all day long. Now, part of the reason I was able to do that was when I graduated in 1980 for the first time, and the only time, they allowed me to take the California bar on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They started on Monday, Tuesday essays, Wednesday multi-state, and Arizona started Wednesday multi-state, and Thursday and Friday were their essays. So I actually took both bars in the same week, passed them both on my first try. Glutton for punishment, but it would come back to serve me well, because I later on, once I got involved in cannabis, I would go back to Arizona and started their medical marijuana program. I hate to say it's the Arizona Medical Marijuana Act. As we all know, the correct botanical name is cannabis. So I've actually done every issue you can imagine when it comes to cannabis. I currently own and operate several licensed facilities. I opened the 3rd, the 7th, the 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th dispensaries in Arizona. Owned the 3rd dispensary and opened the first manufacturing in the state of Arizona, and had that market for 7 months. And I continue to have licenses and continue to be involved in operations, as well as consulting with others who do the same. But my passion has always been the medical aspects of cannabis. And part of my better 2/3 is cannabis nurse Heather. You can Google her, but she's the leading clinical nurse in the United States on cannabis and cannabis healthcare. And so I helped start her organization several years ago. Like I said, in 2014, I proved in a 4.5-hour evidentiary hearing that cannabis was safe and effective for post-traumatic stress disorder and multiple other conditions. After that, virtually every state that had a medical cannabis program added PTSD to their list. And so we're proud to have done that. Now, I will tell you that I've learned this in proving that case, that all cannabis is medical cannabis, and everyone who uses cannabis uses it for a medical reason, whether they know it or not. It's the 12th system of the human body. It's called the human endocannabinoid system. It's the emotional center of our brain. It's where the primary receptors are located, the CB1 receptors. And that's the reason why it helps our veterans, and really women are more predominant in the area of post-traumatic stress disorder due to sexual abuse and assault, things like that. So it's a huge, huge issue, PTSD. And all these things are connected too. PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and obviously CTE, chronic traumatic encephalitis, which those of you who remember Junior Sale was a friend of mine who I helped start the Junior Sale football complex at Parkway Middle School. He actually took his own life. He shot himself in the heart so that his brain could be studied for the prevalence of CTE. We discovered then that out of the 130 brains that were submitted from NFL players, all 130 had CTE. And so we've always known since the early 2000s, since the US government had a patent on it, that cannabis is also a valuable drug protected. So I continue to work on all these issues, and there are many, many more. This is not a stop. The adult program has helped us to keep the FDA further away from cannabis, and so it's good. But the medical aspects continue to be of interest to me. And so 3 years ago, I got involved with a very dear friend of mine whose son was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and died 7 weeks later. And the first hospital they went with pumped him full of fentanyl and opioids so that he couldn't engage with his family, even though we only had a matter of weeks to live. The hospital refused to allow us to give him the extracts and Nurse Heather had prepared to treat him, so we finally found another hospital that he could go to. They allowed cannabis use within 12 hours of using the extracts. He was able to fully engage, pain-free, with his family for the last few weeks of his life. That guy's name was Ryan, and we created Ryan's Law. Senate Bill 311. It took us 3 years to get it passed in California. It passed in 2021. The governor signed it September 28th of 2021. And every member of the Assembly, and every member of the Senate, every Democrat, every Republican, every independent voted for the governor's sign. That went into law. California became the first state to allow people who were in that same condition, suffering from a terminal illness, being able to use now in the hospitals and in healthcare facilities to use cannabis, although there's limitations on smoking. So these are the kinds of things that keep me passionate about it. I still maintain all my activities in terms of licensing and business operations and things like that. But we pay it forward because cannabis is the most important medicinal plant. And we know that 2/3 of all pharmaceuticals come from plants. And cannabis is a safe, effective, and gentle plant medicine. And it's the 12th system of the human body. It provides homeostasis for all other aspects of our body, all other of our essential vital elements. And it's the one that can be used safely, non-psychoactively, and eventually 330 million Americans, and if there's more, they will all use and benefit from cannabis.
Thank you, Ken. I too am a graduate from Cal Western. My class, Ken, was 1982.
Okay.
And I thought that I was gonna be the older statesperson, but he beat me by 2 years. So, let me ask you this question. You're an owner of several dispensaries and you do your advocacy work as well. And sometimes people are more interested in the business aspect of cannabis as opposed to the advocacy side. You seem to have kind of balance for both. But what about those students and those individuals who are interested in getting involved in the cannabis industry? Maybe starting their own business or being part of a dispensary or representing a cannabis business. What advice would you have for them?
I would say get as much practical experience as you can. By and large, the small local operators are the ones who typically tend to be more passionate about what we're doing. If you haven't embraced the health aspects of cannabis or some of the issues of injustice or against, it's not in your soul to be passionate and do something, then, I mean, that's fundamentally as a human being, I think, where we start. But to be a good practitioner of any aspect of law, you have to be passionate, caring, interested in the subject you're dealing with. And there's real people out there who benefit greatly from quality health practitioners and quality lawyers who are working in the business. And you'll enjoy it. It's a young enough industry, but will grow and grow and grow and become even bigger in the area of plant medicine. And so it's plenty of time to get involved, meet dispensary owners, manufacturers, go to the conferences. They have the huge business conference in Las Vegas a little later this month. So, it seems kind of, basic, but go there, pay whatever the admission is, $200 probably. But go there and meet all the people in the industry, talk to them, get to know them, find out what's on their mind. Be like that investigative journalist as you're young and you have the time to do that, and then be passionate about it.
Thank you. Our next speaker is McCracke, and what I have next to your name, Casey, is cannabis business law practice. So I'm going to let you speak about that, but keep in mind my question is going to be at the end of your information. What advice do you have for these students and people who are interested in actually representing the cannabis industry with a business law practice?
Well, I will keep that in mind. First of all, can everyone hear me? All right?
Yeah. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Judge. Thank you, everyone in this who's come tonight. I too am a Cal Western graduate, not back in 1980, a little more recent. I graduated in 2010. Very proud of my attendance at Cal Western. Learned a lot while I was here. I did not get involved in cannabis law until after I graduated. My involvement started a little more organically. My father was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2012, and he went through the myriad of different prescribed medications, which really are lesser than what people may think. You 2 or 3 medications that work for a certain amount of time, and you go from 1 to 2 to 3, and then at that point, unfortunately, kind of SOL. My father, luckily, was able to live with Parkinson's for about 8 years, which is considerably longer than others. But unfortunately, those medications stopped giving him any sort of benefit about 2 to 3 years into his diagnosis. So he then had about a year when he was still taking these medications, having the negative drawbacks that come with the medications, but not receiving the benefits that he used to receive. So we kind of started having to think outside the box. Cannabis was, I've lived in California my whole life. Cannabis has been, a part of California since 1996, more openly since 2004. It's something that, I'd like to say that I always believed in the medicinal benefits, but to be honest, I really did not. As a kid, high schooler, I always thought it was kind of a wink-wink type thing, just as a way to try to, push the recreational side of the plant into our commercial use. That being said, I learned so much after getting involved in the different philanthropic groups like Normal, ASA, both have great San Diego chapters, have great California chapters and national chapters. And started learning really that so many different types of conditions can be treated with cannabis that the public weren't aware of. Glaucoma was always what, was the wink-wink, which people said, I need cannabis for. Obviously, it worked, and it worked for a lot of other things. Parkinson's, right around the time I started going to these events, there was information coming out, Parkinson's patients receiving a lot of benefit from using mainly edibles and concentrates. Obviously, the smoking is a little more difficult for someone with Parkinson's, but my parents were children of the 60s, so it wasn't a huge barrier to break down with them. My father was not a cannabis user before, but at that point, we were kind of willing to use anything to try to help with his pain. So I got involved with Normal. I met the attorney that I work with now. I'm of counsel at Wicker Law Group. Ed Wicker has worked in the industry here in San Diego for a long time, very well-known attorney and advocate for the industry and for patients long before regulation in 2016. Ed introduced me to other people in the industry. Obviously, at the same time, we started to see the benefits for my father. Slowly but surely, we started tailoring. There's so little research at that point, so we really didn't know what to do. I just go to the dispensary, get an edible, talk to someone. CBD obviously was very big at that time, but not much research on it. So little by little, we started finding things that worked for my father. We started really slow, small milligrams, small doses, and he lost his ability to speak his last, I'd say, 18 months. So that makes it even that much more difficult to find out, hey, is this working? What works? What helps? Needless to say, long story, a little less long. As I said, he had lost his ability to speak for about 18 months. I'd say about 6 months into, or about a year into that, with about 6 months left of his life, we decided to, take a more aggressive approach and started using tinctures and cannabis that's much, with a much higher dose of both THC and CBD. And so there would be probably a handful of times when my father would be able to speak in full sentences. Now, granted, it would only last for a few times, for a few days, and it wouldn't extend more than maybe a week. But in that last 6 months, we were able to hear his voice on a handful of times when the year before we did not. So I look at cannabis as something that has done so much for my family. My son was 4 when my dad died, so he really did not even remember his voice for those first 2 years, and he does remember those last 6 months of being able to communicate with him. So it's helped me personally in my life, and when I became involved with Normal and Ed, I obviously made it a part of my professional life. That was in 2016, right at legalization, but prior to regulation. At that point, we were working, as you mentioned, with what we call the legacy operators, those operators that really were the backbone of this industry, and the ones that some of which even had to deal with legal enforcement, had to deal with being ostracized in their community. But we're really working to try to give those people like my father that ability to find some sort of relief from what they were suffering from. So I was really proud to be able to work with those smaller operators who first prior to legalization and then help them during or after legalization, kind of work their way into the legal market. Some were able to, some were not. It was a really onerous process for a lot of operators, especially because they didn't come from the type of industry that was, they didn't have the knowledge to be able to submit applications, to be able to run financial, analysis to really determine the best way to operate a business. So it was a very difficult time for those businesses in that first couple of years. But I feel like, as the industry moved on and became more transparent, the operators had a better chance to bring in consultants, attorneys, and again, it didn't have the stigma that it once had, and they were able to bring in a team to really make their businesses thrive. And I feel proud to have been a part of that. Originally, again, it was in the licensing part of the business, but once COVID hit and we lost access to a lot of our local governments, I started trending toward, I kind of feel that you either, adapt or die in business. And when the industry started to change, I felt that I had to do just that, adapt. And I started working more with the license transfers and the permit transfers, which is really important because in cannabis, it's not the same. When you want to sell a business, it's not just like selling a stamp business or a flower business where, you sell you go through the corporate side of the transaction and that's it. Cannabis requires a very onerous disclosure process. And that's working with local governments at the first side of it and then the state after. And I would say for the past 2 to 3 years, that's what I've been doing. As more local governments open up their permits, it makes it so the industry widens a little more. Those type of, a lot of these operators are those legacy operators who have operated for the last 4 or 5 years, figured that, their time in the industry is done, and they are now looking to move on and sell their businesses, and a lot of times they're able to do so at a significant profit because of now kind of entering what I like to call the corporatization of cannabis. We have our large operators coming in, making it that much more difficult for those legacy operators to operate, and sometimes forcing them, sometimes it's their own decision, but a lot of them are seeking to exit the industry, and that requires selling the business, and sometimes that can be a year-long process when you have to do the what we call basically a 2-tiered transaction. The buyers come in, get approved at the local and state level. One of the sellers has to stay associated with the business for a certain amount of time, and then can transfer out after that approval process.
So Casey, my question to you is the same as my question to others, and that is, what advice do you want to give the students and some of the participants here this evening about the cannabis business law practice and kind of some things that they could keep in mind if they really want to practice in that area of expertise?
Sure. As I think Ken said, not to give more research, or maybe it was Whitney, but the regulations. Right now, I can't tell you anything more important than being knowledgeable about the state regulations, any state, specifically California because we're here, but also the local government's regulations. Our local governments are really where the most, or the approval process at the local governments is really where the difficulty sits, because they're the gatekeepers. State licenses are really, it's just a matter of formality. But those local regulations can be completely different one jurisdiction to the next, and being on top of those regulations, knowing the people who work in the cannabis departments at those local jurisdictions, I mean, they are the most knowledgeable people you can imagine. And a lot of times, we think that bureaucrats maybe are not, are just there to do the 9 to 5, but I can't tell you how many or how much help I have received from people at local jurisdictions cannabis departments. So having relationships with them is extremely valuable.
Thank you. Our next speaker is W.E Laurie.